Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Credit Transactions. As I have mentioned last meeting, the title Credit Transactions is appropriate in the sense that not all transactions are contracts. Okay? Example, kaning legal pledge, mga judicial deposits, necessary deposits. These are not contracts, but all the transactions here in this subject naturally involve credit. Pasabot nga, this is in the belief that a party will be able to comply with his obligation in the future. I also mentioned in the past that all or not all credit transactions are bailments because not all credit transactions would involve the delivery of property of one person to another in trust for a specific purpose with a contract that the trust shall be faithfully executed and the property returned or duly accounted for when the special purpose is accomplished or kept until the bailor reclaims it. A good example of this is guarantee. In guarantee, this contract may be perfected and later extinguished without anything being delivered to the other party. Also, you will notice later in our study na in a standard arrangement of mortgage, whether it is a chattel or real estate mortgage, nothing is delivered to the mortgagee. Okay? Walay gi-deliver sa mortgagee, but still the contract of this particular transaction or the mortgage in this case is still perfected. Mao na nga we would say na not all credit transactions are bailments. Pero clearly, no, as you have already knew or studied, a classic bailment nga credit transaction kay kaning comodatum. Mao nga ang tawag nato sa parties aning comodatum would be bailor and bailee. Okay? Kining deposit, bailment sad ni because a thing is required to be delivered for its perfection. Pero note ha nga kung ang contract kay contract of deposit, ayaw tawga ang parties nga bailor or bailee. Okay? You call them as depositor and depositary. Kay basin kung mugamit kag bailor or bailee, magtuon niya ng mag-conduct sa exam ninyo nga iyang pasabot is comodatum. Bisag ang contract in this instance is that of deposit. So you have to be mindful and be precise when it comes to the terms in answering your questions. So as far as credit transactions, which are contracts, I want you to also note that only loans and deposits are principal contracts. Alright? Only loans and deposits are principal contracts. All others nga matawag na tong contracts, these are merely accessory contracts. Alright? Balik ko na ko. As far as credit transactions, which are contracts, only loans and deposits are principal contracts. All others, accessory contracts na sila tanan. Alright? So I hope you already have a picture of what this subject is all about. So let's start with the loans. Okay? The first thing yun na inyong i-remember in the contract of loans would be this. There are two kinds of a loan. Okay? There are two kinds of loan. Una, comodatum. Ang ikaduha, mutuom or simple loan. And you have to note nga lahi ni silang duha. Alright? There are two kinds of loans and you have to remember that comodatum is different from mutuom or simple loan. Now, let's start with comodatum. Unsa maning comodatum? Ningon ang balaod, by a contract of loan, one of the parties delivers to another either something not consumable so that the latter may use the same of a certain time and return it. Mao ni ang comodatum. In other words, the thing is delivered for the use of that particular thing. But that thing has to be returned. Okay? Mao nang contract of comodatum. Now, when we talk about mutuom, the law provides that when there is a delivery of a thing to the other, the debtor in this case has to pay with a thing of the same kind and quality. Ang example ani, manguam kag kwarta. Okay? mo uli ka sa imong gihuam nga kwarta, also the same kind and quality. Di kay nang huam ka 100, ang imong ibalik 50. Okay? You can also borrow rice. This is also mutuom as long as it is ang imong giuli is of the same kind and quality. Nang huam ka og kanang sinanduming nga bugas, di pwede NFA imong ibalik nga bugas, okay? Because in mutuom, you have to pay the debtor or you have to pay the creditor with a thing of the same kind and quality, all right? In comodatum, you have to note that there is a special kind of comodatum. This is known as precarium, all right? Precarium, from the word itself, no? In English, we call this precarious or unstable. In precarium, the bailor can actually demand the return of the thing at will. Meaning, at any time. Ang right sa baili aning sitwasyon na is that anytime, pwedeng mawa. Okay? Pwede siyang mawala. There is no period. There's no particular purpose. The bailee in this case would have the right to use the thing borrowed by mere tolerance lang. Okay? So, I also want you to note that if ang question would pertain to precarium, the special kind of comodatum, you have to tell the examiner that, this is a precarium. Para si examiner would know, kanig yun nga estudyante really knows what he's talking about, what she's talking about. Okay? Unsa man day relevance ani. Ang effect man gud ani is very clear, all right? If there is a period agreed upon man good within which the bailee can actually use the thing, the rule is that ang bailor cannot demand the return of the thing until the expiration of the period. Okay? So, bisag gratuitous pa na paghuwam niya sa butang, the bailor has to respect the right of the bailee. Pero kung precarium na, mao na siya mubalik gyud ta nga the thing here or the bailor in this case can always demand the return of the thing at will, at any time. Unlike when it is an ordinary comodatum wherein the bailor really has to respect the right of the bailee in this case. Okay? Kaya naaman sila gisabutan nga period within which si bailee makagamit sa butang nga iyang gihulman. So, the bailor in that case has to respect the right of the bailee. But there are exceptions, okay? Ang first exception is if ang bailor has an urgent need, okay? Panalitan, gustong dalhon ni bailor ang iyang asawa sa ospital kay mga nakay na. Of course, pwedeng i-return sa bailee ang thing even before the expiration of the period, okay? Nang huwam kag sakyanan ni bailor for let's say 1 month, but on the second week, ang asawa ni bailor, talianak, gusto niyang dalon sa hospital. So even before the expiration of the 1 month period, bisag ikaduha pa lang ng a week, pwedeng mo demand si bailor nga iuli sa na ang sakyanan nga imong gihulman ako. But in this case, ang komodatum wala na extinguish. It is merely suspended. Okay? So even before the expiration of the period, the bailor can actually demand the return of the thing if he has an urgent need of the said thing. Alright? The second exception would be that when the bailee committed an act of ingratitude. Okay? Kaning concept sa ingratitude would be the concept that you will find in your law on donations. Okay? Example, ani kaning kung si bailee nang huwam og van sa iyahang silingan. Okay? Si Chino, nang huwam siya van karon sa iyahang classmate nga si, let's say, Kenny. Alright? And then, in this case, example lang ito, when ang van na apakang Chino, ni commitron si Chino o say crime against the daughter of Kenny. Alright? The question is, can Kenny in this case validly demand for the return of the van nga gihulman ni Chino? Alright? What would be your answer? Actually, it would depend, no? It depends if the anak of Kenny is still under her parental authority. Okay? Because kung ang anak ni Kenny in this case is already, say, 30 years old or 40 years old, it will not, or it will no longer be considered an act of ingratitude. Because under the law of the nations, you can only commit a crime against the child kung ang kaninga child is actually under the parental authority of the bailor. Okay? So you have to distinguish in this instance. But kung klaro kaayo nga ang bata is a minor and still under the parental authority of the bailor, and the bailee commits a crime against the child of the bailor, in this case, ang bailee is clearly committing an act of ingratitude. And even before the expiration of the period nga iyahang gamiton ang butang nga iyang gihulman from the bailor can always say, oh, you return the thing that you borrowed even before its expiration because you committed an act of ingratitude. Alright? I hope that's clear for everyone. Now on to the characteristics of loan, okay? Ang comodatum, you have to remember nga this is purely personal, okay? The death of either party will actually extinguish their obligation. Now, in simple loan or in mutuom, this is not personal, and the death of either party will not extinguish the obligation. So you will ask, sino ang magbabayad kung mamatay si debtor? Of course, the heirs of the debtor. Alright? The estate of the debtor will be held answerable for the obligations left by the said debtor. Okay, so simple loan or mutuom, this is not personal and it will survive even after the death of either parties. Alright? Now, on to the cause in comodatum. This is a contract which is essentially gratuitous. Alright? Gratuitous ning comodatum. Ang simple loan, this is actually gratuitous unless there is an express stipulation in writing to pay the interest. Okay? You have to note that the payment of the interest must be expressly stipulated in writing. If stipulated in writing ni, we call this kind of interest as compensatory interest. Okay? Note that this compensatory interest is different from the interest that may accrue because the debtor incurs in delay. Okay? The interest that is required in writing is the so-called compensatory interest. Okay? Example, ane, if the debt is with a stipulation that the same is payable in 1 year with interest, kana nga interest that is stipulated in writing is the so-called compensatory interest. Alright? But if there's no stipulation, pero nag-due date na, and demand is made, however, no payment is made and it was already in delay, then the debtor in this case can be held liable for damages by way of interest. In this case, kani nga damages by way of interest, there is no need for it to be stipulated in writing because the law already provides for the payment of the same. Okay? Ang balaod na mismo ang niingon, if you are already in delay and there was already a demand, however, there's no payment yet, you can be held liable for damages by way of interest. Alright? So, let's go back to the compensatory interest. Okay? Example ko, no? There's a stipulation in writing that you will have to pay a 3% interest per month. Okay? Suppose in 1 year, how much will be recovered by the creditor? 36%? The answer is no, because that stipulation is void for being unconscionable, exorbitant, excessive. So therefore, you will lower the rate of the interest into that of the legal rate, which is currently in 6% per annum. Okay? So as of July 1, 2013 onwards, there's no more distinction. Appeal na ang loans, in this case, 6% ang interest per annum. Okay? But if ang loans were actually incurred prior to July 1, 2013, meaning June 30, 2013 paubos, ang interest aning loans is still 12% pa. So you have to really make a distinction. Okay? But kung ang loan lang na-incur karon, wala na distinction whether it is loan or forbearance of money whatsoever, we stick with the 6% legal rate per annum. Okay? Now, question. If ang borrower in this case paid interest, even if it is not expressly stipulated in writing, verbal lang, unya, he pays, can he recover the amount paid by way of interest even if it is not stipulated in writing? The answer, I suppose, would be yes, because under the principle of solutio indebitino, it will be considered as if the same or the payment of the interest was actually delivered through mistake and it doesn't have the right to such payment. Si creditor in this case does not have the right to such payment. So ang iyang obligation is to return the interest paid by the borrower in this case by virtue of the principle of solutio indebiti. All right? You also note that comodatum is a principal and a real contract. Parehara sila sa simple loan or mutuom. These contracts, comodatum and simple loan or mutuom, are principal and real contracts. When you say real contract siya because the delivery of the thing loaned is necessary for the perfection of the contract. Meaning, you cannot be considered in default if you have not yet received the thing, okay, the subject matter of the contract. Bisan pag nagsabot sila og certain due date, o niya nalapas na ang certain due date, if there was no delivery yet, okay, if the borrower did not receive anything or the subject matter of the contract, default will not yet set in. Okay? Mao na nga, in this case, it is very important nga there was already a delivery of the thing because it is necessary for the perfection of the contract. So, balik ta, walay default kay wala pa may perfection sa contract. So, you have to note that comodatum and simple loans are practically real contracts. Alright? Now, with respect to subject matter, ang comodatum, pwede niyang mahimong subject matter ang movables and immovable. Okay? Also, non-consumable can also be subject matter of comodatum, but consumable may be subject matter only for mere exhibition. Alright? Example, libro, manghuam ka, pwede na. Pero manghuam ka og bugas, di na siya pwede. Pwede rin na siya kung ang purpose is for mere exhibition. Alright? Okay, with respect to simple loan or mutuom, only consumables ang subject matter ani, okay? You cannot see a provision wherein there is a mention of non-consumables. Pero si Tolentino in his book would say that non-consumables may be a subject for a simple loan. Like kanang mga books, okay? Because according to him, ang Spanish word for the definition of simple loan, kung sakto pa daw pagka-translate, dapat fungible siya. Okay? Meaning, the thing borrowed can be replaced by a thing of the same kind and quality. So, for purposes lang of defining the subject matter, we just stick with the provision of the law which provides that only consumables may be a subject matter of simple loan. But I am inclined to agreeing with what Tolentino actually said. Kay sayop man jud ang pag-translate sa Spanish Civil Code. But anyway, let's move on now to the rights and obligations of the parties. Okay? In comodatum, note that with respect to reimbursement, as to the expenses that may be incurred by the bailee in relation to the thing borrowed, what are the types of expenses that a bailee can actually seek reimbursement from the bailor? Okay, muna yung question. So, example lang. Kung si Chino nang huwam og van kang Kenny, alright? If Chino actually borrowed a van from Kenny, and in the course of borrowing the said van, Chino changed the tires into mug wheels, okay? And then he spent about 150,000, okay? I-note niya ang mga expenses, okay? Ang ordinary tires sa van ni Kenny, gi-change ni Chino into that of a mag wheel. Okay? Nahimo ng mag wheels, ang expenses nga na-incur for the change into mag wheels would be 150,000. And then after a year of using the said van, si Chino would spend about 150,000 as well for the gasoline. Okay? 150,000 para sa gasolina. And then another expense would be sa car wash. Okay, nakagasto ron si Chino og mga 50,000 for the car wash. And then, kay naamay defect ang brake system sa van, gipa-repair pod siya ni Chino. Ang iyang nagasto for the repair sa brake system is 20,000. Okay, upat na ka-expenses, balik ko nako. Ang ligid, gi-change na into mag wheels, he spent 150,000. And then after a year of using the van, he spent for the gasoline in the amount of 150,000. And then sa iyang pagpa-car wash, sige, 50,000. And then na defective brake system, 20,000. And then lastly, while ang van nakapark sa garahe ni Chino, na earthquake. Okay? So because of the earthquake, it had to be repaired. Of all these expenses, which among ani nga mga expenses ang subject for reimbursement? Aha man ani? In answering this question, you have to find out first kung ang expenses necessary ba siya for the use or preservation. Okay? Kung necessary ba siya for the use or preservation, or is it for mere ornamentation? So duha imong tan-awon, okay? Is it necessary for the use or preservation, or is it only for ornamentation? Sunod, kung you already distinguished kung this is necessary for the use or preservation, you ask further. Is this expense for the use or preservation an ordinary expense or an extraordinary expense? Okay? Nakabaw na ka nga ang iyang expenses nga na-incur for the use and preservation. But ang imong sunod pangutana is it an ordinary expense or is it an extraordinary expense? Kung ordinary expenses na siya, you cannot seek for reimbursement from the bailor. Okay? Si bailee, di siya kapaningil og reimbursement from the bailor. But if the expenses incurred by the bailee is an extraordinary expense, kung ang expenses extraordinary, this will be the time nga ang reimbursement from the bailor would be available or would come in. Okay? So ato dong tagsa-tagsaon og tubag. By the way, kung ornamentation, manamang kag-ingon ngo na this is necessary for the use and preservation, you also identified na this is ordinary. Ordinary again, no reimbursement. If extraordinary, na ay reimbursement. Pero ang ikaduha, kung panalitan, ornamentation ra siya, all the more nga ang expenses incurred by the bailee in this case, kung mere ornamentation lang na siya, di gyud na siya pwedeng ma-reimburse or di na niya mapaningil for reimbursement from the bailor, okay? So ato kunong ansiran og tagsa-tagsa. Katong tires nga giilisa ni Chino into that of mag wheels, 150,000. Kana siya, necessary ba siya for the user preservation? The answer is no, okay? For mere ornamentation, ra na siya. Now, the second question, katong after a year, nakaspend si Chino og gasoline in the amount of 150,000. Is that necessary for the use or preservation? Yes, that is necessary for the use of preservation. Next question, is it reimbursable? Ordinary ba siya or extraordinary? The answer is ordinary. Okay, ordinary expense gina siya when you use a van or when you use a car. Di man gina mo dagan kung way gasolina. That's an ordinary expense, okay? Kaning car wash, is this necessary for the use and preservation? Yes. Is this extraordinary or ordinary? This is ordinary and no reimbursement is available for the bailee, okay? Now, katong ikaupat, defective brake system. Defective brake system. Is this necessary for the use or preservation of the van? The answer is yes. Okay? So, necessary gud na kay brake system gud atong gihisgutan. Kung di na maayo, pwedeng mabangga ang ga-drive, alright? The question is this an ordinary expense or extraordinary expense? I would say na this is an extraordinary expense because the brake system of a particular car or a particular vehicle dili na basta-bastang maguba. So kung maguba man gyud ganin na siya, that will be considered an extraordinary expense and that can be claimed by the bailee for reimbursement from the bailor. All right? Now, ang katong atong hisgutan nga while the car was parked in the garage and then there was an earthquake and it had to be repaired. Ordinary expense na siya or necessary for the user preservation? The answer is, of course, yes. Okay? Is it ordinary or extraordinary? Extraordinary and 100% ang ma-reimburse ni bailee provided that the bailee provides for a notice to the bailor in this case. Okay? But you have to remember na if the thing was actually damaged through a fortuitous event while being used, kung gigamit siya, only 50% ang entitlement ni bailee in this case for reimbursement. Okay? I hope that's clear. Kailangan lang nimong i-distinguish kung necessary ba siya for the use or preservation. If imo na na-identify that it is necessary for the use or preservation, you now further identify if this is an ordinary expense or if this is an extraordinary expense. Kung ordinary siya, no reimbursement. Kung extraordinary, that's the time nga ang reimbursement mo come in. Okay? Unya, klaro kaayo nga kung for mere ornamentation lang siya, no reimbursement is available for the bailee in this case. Alright? I hope, klaro na. Now, what happens if there's a loss or a loss of the thing is due to a fortuitous event? Okay? Kabaw naman ta sa rule in your oblicon, diba? Specifically in Article 1174, that no person can be held liable for events which could not have been foreseen except when the law so provides. Okay? So generally, kung ang loss of the thing is due to a fortuitous event, as a general rule, dili jud liable ang person. Okay? Except kung ang balaod na mismo ang nag-ingon nga you can be held liable even if the loss of the thing or even if the destruction of the thing is due to a fortuitous event. And unsa man ani in this case in the law of commodatum, ang 1942 mismo, the law provides that the bailee in this case can be held liable for the loss of the thing even if it should be through a fortuitous event. Alright? Example, kung si Chino borrowed a truck and then there's a fire. And he only had a chance to save in that fire one truck. Okay? Naa siya truck sad sa iyang balay, duha ka truck na ang iyang gihulman o ang iyaha mismo. And during the fire, usa ra gyud ang iyang pwedeng i-save, but ang iyang gi-save ang iyang kaugalingon nga truck, his own truck, instead of the other truck that he borrowed from the bailor. The question is this: is Chino in this case liable for the loss of the truck? The answer is yes. Under Article 1942, Paragraph 5, if being able to save either the thing borrowed or his own thing, he chose to save the latter, the bailee in this case is liable for the loss of the thing, even if it should be through a fortuitous event. Okay? I hope klaro na. So, ato daw tagsa-tagsaon ng Article 1942. Article 1942 provides that the bailee is liable for the loss of the thing even if it should be through a fortuitous event. Una nga instance, if he devotes the thing to any purpose different from that for which it has been loaned. Example, nang huwam si Chino sa iyang amiga nga si Kenny og sakyanan to bring his wife to Chonghua Hospital kay talianak. But instead of just bringing the wife, nihapit siya pamasahero. And if ever ma-destroy ang thing or ma-loss ang thing because iyang gigamit for the purpose different from which it was actually loaned, in this case, even if the loss or the destruction of the thing is through a fortuitous event, si Chino will be held liable. Okay? That's the first instance. Ikaduha, if he keeps it longer than the period stipulated or after the accomplishment of the use for which the comodatum has been constituted. In short, there was already a delay na human na ang period within which to use the thing borrowed niya, wala niya giuli. And then there's a loss or destruction of the thing. Nya, in delay naman siya, in this case, si bailee will be held liable for the loss of the thing. Alright? The third is, if the thing loaned has been delivered with appraisal of its value, unless there is a stipulation exempting the bailee from responsibility in case of a fortuitous event. In this case, ang reason gani nga nay appraisal is to notify the bailee in this case nga munay value ha. So kung mawa na or kung ma-destroy na, even if it be through a fortuitous event, you will be held liable. That's the reason where there's an appraisal. Okay? Now, number 4 is if he lends or leases the thing to a third person who is not a member of his household. Nang huwam ragay siya, gipahuwam pa niya lain. Okay? Ang exception lang is kung ang iyang gipahuwam is member sa iyahang household. Alright? The fifth is what we discussed earlier, nga if being able to save either the thing borrowed or his own thing, he chose to save the latter. This is also a form of ingratitude in this case. So, kay ingrato man ka, nang huwam na gani ka, nyawa pag yun nimo, gisave ang imong gihuwam, so, naay consequence. Ang consequence, ana, is that you will be held liable even if the loss or the destruction is through a fortuitous event. Alright? So, lastly, in this lesson, I'll just discuss the case of Republic versus Bhagtas. This was decided by the Supreme Court in October 25, 1962. One of the oldest cases discussing the concept of the liability of the borrower in this case for fortuitous event. Okay? So, ang facts sa case, mauni. Si Bhagtas borrowed from the Bureau of Animal Industry 3 bulls for a period of 1 year for breeding purposes subject to a government charge of breeding fee of 10% of the book value of the books. Upon the expiration of the contract, si Bhagtas asked for a renewal for another 1 year. However, the Secretary of Agriculture and Natural Resources approved only the renewal for 1 bull and the other 2 bulls be returned. Okay? Usara ang gi-approve for renewal. So si Bhagtas then wrote a letter to the Director of Animal Industry that he would pay the value of the 3 bulls with a deduction of yearly depreciation. The director advised him that the value cannot be depreciated and asked Bhagtas to either return the bulls or just pay their book value. So si Bhagtas, in this case, neither paid nor returned the bulls. So the Republic then commenced an action against Bhagtas, ordering him to return the bulls or pay their book value. So after the hearing, the trial court ruled in favor of the Republic, and as such, the Republic moved ex parte for a writ of execution, which the court granted. Si Mrs. Bhagtas, ang surviving spouse ni Mr. Bhagtas, okay, kinamatay man later on si Mr. Bhagtas, returned the two bulls and filed a motion to quash the writ of execution since one bull cannot be returned for it was killed by a gunshot during a hukbalahap raid. Okay? So, the court denied her motion, hence, ning appeal or disappeal certified by the Court of Appeals because only questions of laws were only raised. So, nisaka ni siya, gisertify yan sa Court of Appeals. Alright? Ang issue here is whether or not the contract was a comodatum, and if this was comodatum, whether Bhagtas can be held liable for its loss due to force majeure. So, ninyo ng Supreme Court, ang ilang decision is this. A contract of comodatum is essentially gratuitous. The Supreme Court held that Bhagtas was liable for the loss of the bull even though it was caused by a fortuitous event. Because, ninyo ng Supreme Court, if the contract was one of lease, then the 10% breeding charge is compensation or rent for the use of the bull, and Bhagtas as lessee is subject to the responsibilities of a possessor. He is also in bad faith because he continued to possess the bull even though the term of the contract has already expired. Ningon pag ng Supreme Court, if ang kontrata dili lease, kundi comodatum, he is still liable because he kept the bull longer than the period stipulated. And the thing loaned has been delivered with appraisal of its value. Okay? No stipulation that in case of loss of the bull due to fortuitous event, the late husband of Mrs. Bhagtas in this case would be exempt from liability. So, giklaro gyud sa Supreme Court nga in this case, Bhagtas is liable. Kay either way, bisag contract of lease pa na siya or contract of comodatum, liable gyud si Bhagtas in this case. Kay kung comodatum pa na, klaro man kaayo nga longer na than the period stipulated ang iyahang pagkeep sa bull. Ikaduha, ang bull was delivered or were delivered to Bhagtas, Mr. Bhagtas, with an appraisal of its value. Alright? So those are the salient features on the contract of loans, and next time we will discuss deposits. Thank you very much. Amping.